think on the legislative grounds, there's so much room, and within the legislative building as well, there's so much room to make space for Indigenous culture and Indigenous peoples, and that absolutely should be led by our Indigenous communities.
A letter to the Premier, penned by federal Conservative MPs, requests the replacement of 2 statues that were taken down here at the Manitoba Legislative Grounds on Canada Day. But the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs says the letter is tone deaf and that Indigenous voices need to be given a seat at the table. On Monday, 8 Conservative members of Parliament and a senator published this letter to the Premier, condemning the destruction of public property and calling for the statues of Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth II to be restored as soon as possible. But the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs says the MPs missed an opportunity to engage with First Nations people.
I thought the letter was ignorant. I thought the letter was very disrespectful. I think that it's callous just to ignore the simple fact that, the vandalism that has occurred. I mean, and there's a reason for it. So we should be talking about it. I know that, these federal MPs are being reactionary, but they, cooler heads prevail. And I think that there was an opportunity to actually have a conversation.
MP Raquel Dancho, one of the signatories of the letter, says tearing down the statues threatened to derail the dialogue around reconciliation.
If we don't restore the statues, I do feel that validates the destructive and unlawful and violent actions of the protesters and may encourage more of that type of behavior. We've seen churches being burned. We have many important symbolic legislative buildings on our grounds and in our province and in our country. We need to ensure we are safe, that the people who work there are protected, that those buildings and those symbols are protected.
Dancho says she understands that people are feeling a lot of pain. She wants to see more Indigenous representation in governing institutions and have those conversations with Indigenous leaders about moving forward peacefully.
I think it's really important that we all engage in important dialogue of what happens on the legislative grounds. I'm happy to be a part of that. I know the provincial government will be leaders on this with Indigenous communities. And I'd like to also have this dialogue happen at the federal level as well. There is plenty of room in the parliamentary precinct to ensure there's more Indigenous representation. Frankly, there should be.
Grand Chief Dumas says Indigenous leaders have made themselves available for dialogue in the past. So now he wants to see politicians stand by the Indigenous community during this tough time.
And I think that the path forward will require a meaningful conversation with First Nations leadership, and it will require the engagement of First Nations to decide how we move and how we address this issue. Because in a strange way, the Crown and the representatives of the Crown do have a unique relationship with us as treaty nations.
In Winnipeg, Marie Gomez, City News.